The inner child is not just a spiritual concept or buzzword. It is a deeply important and massive part of your psyche, and it is one that has one of the biggest influences on how you live, love, and relate to yourself and others. Hello, my name is Jacob, and this is the Moon Mountain Healing Channel. I am doing a 3-part series about the inner child. This is part 1. And after watching this video, you'll have a better understanding of what the inner child is and how I've come to understand it through my own healing journey. So just to let y'all know, I primarily speak from my own experience when it comes to this content. I don't copy and paste what I think sounds good. I try to share my honest, present moment understanding. And that understanding comes from years of working with my own inner child, as well as witnessing others connect with theirs and supporting clients through this process. So that being said, one of the things I've noticed is that the inner child is a huge part of doing shadow work. Why? What is the inner child? Why is it so involved in shadow work? Why does it have such a huge influence on our life, even 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years later? And it's a great question. The inner child and shadow are not exactly the same thing, but they are deeply connected, which I will go into. Let me begin first by saying in Jungian and archetypal psychology, there are different ways people have tried to understand and describe the inner child, and you'll often hear terms like the wounded child, which is mostly what I'm referring to in terms of shadow work. That's the child that did not get their needs met. That is the child that was abused through neglect, violence, through other forms, deprivations. And then there's the eternal child, which is what I've heard it referred to as like the Peter Pan of the child archetypes, the ones that never want to grow up, never want to take responsibility. And finally, the divine child. That is the child that we aspire to connect with and allow to influence our life the most. That's when we're healing, we are shaping ourselves in a way where we can access this divine child. That's where most of the creativity is. That's where all of our creativity is. Our play, our joy, a lot of it is there. And what I've noticed is that regardless of the model, these younger parts of us tend to contain both shadow and light, such as I'm saying here, the divine child can be in the shadow, in the darkness. Therefore, we are hiding from ourselves our greatest treasures. And there are aspects of ourselves we know about consciously, and there are aspects of ourselves that remain outside of our awareness, which I will consider the darkness. An example would be, I have done enough work with the child in me that was made fun of for saying things that were stupid, awkward, or embarrassing. And I can see now how much that experience, that chronic experience, shaped my nervous system and shaped me to be the adult that I am before I started doing the work on this wounded child, with this wounded child. And at some point I learned that unless I was making people laugh, I probably didn't have much to say that was of value. And that belief followed me pretty much up until I started connecting with this wounded child and this part of me, this belief. And I had to work hard on that to get to this point where I am today and where I can sit in front of a camera and speak openly. Yeah, I may still say things that are embarrassing or stupid or whatever, but I don't let that restrict me from showing up and opening my mouth and speaking these things that I feel passionate about. And that is what I mean when I talk about inner child work. What I did was I connected with a wound that I didn't really know was there. I had no idea because it was just so part of me. And then I continued relating to it once I connected with it. And I kept feeling it and working with it in relationships till eventually I found more confidence and more capacity to express what I was actually thinking and feeling. Something that was once unconscious finally became conscious. And once it was conscious, it became integrated. And change was actually rendered possible. So once that happens, once this process begins, it's no longer operating from the shadows in quite the same way, because it's now being related to directly with our conscious awareness. So, what exactly is the inner child? I'm going to start a little abstract and hopefully bring it down to earth as we go. What I've experienced and what I've seen many others experience is that people often connect with younger layers of themselves that has a story. It has emotions, it has needs, fears, and sometimes even a recognizable age. Sometimes they're stuck in certain scenes or environments. And I've had moments where I could feel my inner child so clearly. One example is I remember standing in front of a mirror, looking into my own eyes, and suddenly it felt like I could see him. I remember this started because I was feeling emotional. I was feeling sad. And I don't know what drove me to look in the mirror and to imagine myself looking at this younger version of me. But like I said, I could see him, and it wasn't necessarily metaphorical. And I could feel him present. Eventually, I grabbed a pillow, imagined it was my 5-year-old self. This felt like my little Jacob. And I held him via the pillow against my chest and cried. And I remember letting him know that I'm here. Thank you. Thank you for being here with me. And just deeply connecting. It was incredibly healing. And it's important to say there isn't just one inner child inside of you. It's not just your 5-year-old or 3-year-old. There are many layers. And sometimes it's an 8-year-old, sometimes it's 12. It's all dependent on the layer that is present, that is activated. There's certain stimuli or triggers that are related to these different layers within us. So that might sound super abstract if you don't know what that experience is like, connecting to your inner child. Or maybe you do. Maybe you've gotten angry before, sat with it, gone underneath the anger, and recognized that underneath that anger was a sad little person. Maybe this this sense of being younger, and maybe remembering oh man, the first time I was ever really sad like this or angry like this was when my fill in the blank did fill in the blank. And the age is also depends on what emotional layer is asking for attention, which is something a lot of us were deprived of in certain situations, we needed an adult to show up with stability and regulation to help us navigate our emotions. And honestly, these are closer to being pretty much younger emotional layers. And this, you could consider it that instead of just like the inner child, because it's not literally a child living inside of you. And some people experience the inner child very vividly, younger emotional layers. They might see an image of that child, and that's why it feels like that is an inner child. And it's a younger version of yourself. And people connect with the specific memories, all the context that's involved. Others experience it more subtly through emotions, body sensations, recurring patterns, or reactions. There's no right way to experience the inner child. And what we call the inner child is more like an accumulation of emotional memories, nervous system imprinting, unmet developmental needs, adaptations, wounds, and protective strategies that formed throughout childhood. And so that is why the inner child is so connected, so related to the shadow, because of how embedded these emotional layers to our nervous system and these adaptations that we formed around these super tender, vulnerable wounds and unmet needs. They're protective strategies, like I said. And the inner child is part of us that learned how to survive before we had the resources, wisdom, agency, and life experiences that we likely have now as adults. The agency, the autonomy we now have as adults, the ability to choose to be regulated. That's an adult thing. That's not the responsibility of children. This is something we learn from our caregivers and our adults. But unfortunately, a lot of us didn't. And here's the important thing. The adaptations that we built in order to not getting this regulation from other adults, and they helped us survive. They helped us belong, and they helped us stay connected as much as we could. They helped us also get through experiences that might have otherwise been overwhelming. But what helped us survive as children doesn't always help us thrive as adults. And that is where this work becomes so powerful. Eventually, through enough awareness and enough practice, we begin discovering that we are no longer that child. We are the adult now. We are an adult that is being mightily influenced by the inner child and its unmet needs, its desires, its longing, its yearning for someone to take care of them, to love them unconditionally, to just regulate them. It's all being outsourced. And as children, that is exactly right. We are supposed to outsource our regulation and learn from our adults. And so now we are the adults who need to be the regulated, stable, role model relationship in their life. The inner child is still very much alive in you, still has the exact same needs. And so we are the ones capable of offering that presence we always needed and that compassion that we always needed, the protection and the understanding that we always needed and that we always deserved. And what we eventually find is that we can become the parent our inner child always needed. That's it. That's the healing the inner child in a nutshell, is becoming the parent our inner child always needed. It sounds so easy to say, incredibly challenging in practice. However, it's so doable with consistency. Learning how to sit with our pain instead of abandoning it. Learning how to listen to our needs instead of ignoring them. Learning how to stay connected to ourselves when life gets difficult. And in my experience, that realization changes everything. There's a very good chance that things happening in your life right now are being influenced by unprocessed wounds, unmet needs, and adaptations that were formed long ago. And they have become stuck. The inner child is in there still yearning, still crying, still afraid, still trying to process or express emotions. And there's just no one that has been there to be with them fully. And it's scary. These adaptations that were shaped around these fears and these unprocessed emotions, these survival strategies, they maybe looked like people pleasing, or difficulty setting boundaries, or shutting down during conflict, or constantly needing approval. These are all very brilliantly so that the child can ensure survival, safety, and love. And when I say that, I mean enough of that, enough safety, survival, and love. It's even in the worst of times, we're still like doing everything we can to get enough so that we can keep surviving. And sometimes that means that we just don't need to totally shut down. And that's a very common thing, very much driven by the inner child. Maybe it's feeling like you're never enough no matter how much you accomplish. That's another big one, driven by the inner child. And these patterns, they make a lot more sense once we understand the younger parts of ourselves that learned how to do this. Before the next video, I invite you to spend a little time wondering, what parts of me learned how to survive long before I learned how to thrive? And just sit with that question. You don't need to force an answer. Maybe take that opportunity to go beneath the surface of your survival tactics and ask, what's there? Is there a wound there? Is there something tender? Is there an emotion? Is there a feeling? Is there something I can just be with here and connect to? And in the next video, we're going to explore how the inner child shapes our adult relationships, behaviors, emotional reactions, and the patterns that continue showing up in our lives today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a better understanding of the inner child and what it is, maybe even some ideas of how it shows up in your life. And if you have any comments, please let me know. Happy to hear any of your experiences connecting with your inner child, learning about your inner child, tending to your inner child, and be happy to read those and connect in that way. So please subscribe to the Moon Mountain Healing channel. There will be much more content coming up, hopefully on a weekly basis soon. Thank you. Blessings. Bye.